In the mid-1930s, the town of Macomb, Alabama, was living a lethargic existence in the shadow of the Great Depression. One of the residents of this small southern town was Atticus Finch, a respected lawyer. A widowed father, Atticus lived with his daughter Jean Louise Scout and son Jeremy Jem. Their black maid Calpurnia helped with household chores and acted like a second mother to the children. Scout was a curious and stubborn girl. She preferred to dress like a boy, liked to climb trees and play games with her brother. Jem was a mature and protective older brother. Their father, Atticus, raised them in a house full of books, encouraging reading and thinking. One summer day, their neighbor's nephew, Charles Baker Dill Harris, came to Macomb for a vacation. Imaginative and adventurous, Dill became fast friends with Scout and Jem. The three began to spend the hot summer days playing games and discovering the town's secrets. The boys were most curious about their mysterious neighbor, Arthur Boo Radley. Boo hadn't left his house for years, and the townspeople made up all sorts of scary stories about him. Some said he peered in the windows at night. Others said he ate the vegetables in the gardens. Scout, Jem, and Dill made various plans to get Boo out. One night, they plucked up courage and decided to go into the Radleys' garden. As Jem tried to look in through the side window of the house, he saw a shadow and they started to run. While running, Jem got his pants caught on the fence and had to take them off. Later, when he went back to get his pants, he found that they had been neatly folded and repaired. This was the first incident that changed the way the children thought about Boo. That summer, the children began to find small gifts in the tree hollow: chewing gum, carved soap figures, an old clock. They thought these gifts were from Boo. Gradually, they began to realize that Boo wasn't so scary after all. As the summer progressed, Scout and Jem began to discover different sides of their father. One day, when Atticus killed a rabid dog with one shot, the children realized that he was not only a book reader, but also someone with hidden talents. The town sheriff, Heck Tate, nicknamed Atticus One-Shot Finch. In the fall, Scout started school. She struggled in the early days. She already knew how to read and write and had trouble understanding the methods of her teacher, Miss Caroline. Atticus taught him to be patient and to try to understand the point of view of others. This was a lesson Scout would remember for the rest of her life. At school, Scout made new friends and got to know people from different parts of Macomb. He befriended a poor boy named Walter Cunningham. Atticus invited Walter home for dinner and taught the boys not to judge people based on their social status. When winter came, Macomb faced an unusual cold snap. One night, Mrs. Maudie Atkinson's house caught fire. While the whole town was trying to put out the fire, Scout and Jem were watching. At that moment, they noticed a blanket draped over Scout's shoulders. No one saw who had brought the blanket. Later, they realized it was Boo Radley. This completely changed the way they thought about Boo. They no longer saw him as a monster, but as a quiet and kind neighbor. Meanwhile, Atticus received a difficult case. A black man named Tom Robinson was accused of raping a white woman, Mayella Ewell. Atticus agreed to defend Tom. This decision resonated in Macomb, where racism was rampant, and set off a chain of events that would profoundly affect the Finch family's lives. The trial of Tom Robinson turned the quiet life of Macomb upside down. Atticus's verdict sparked a great debate in the town. Many people criticized Atticus for defending a black man instead of a white man. Scout and Jem were ridiculed by other children because of their father's decision. At school, they were called nigger lovers, and many of their friends stopped talking to them. Atticus told his children the importance of doing the right thing. "True courage," Atticus said, "is to start a fight when you know you will lose at the beginning and continue to the end." These words became a motto that shaped Scout and Jem's lives. In the process, the children got to know Calpurnia better. One Sunday, Calpurnia took them to a black church. This experience gave Scout and Jem their first close-up look into the life of Macomb's black community. The warmth and solidarity they saw in the church profoundly affected their thinking about race and equality. As the trial drew closer, tensions in the town grew. One night, As Atticus stood guard outside the courthouse, a group of men came to threaten him. Scout, Jem, and Dill had secretly followed Atticus. Scout's innocent intervention and a conversation with Walter Cunningham's father diffused the tense situation and caused the men to retreat. This further strengthened Atticus's love for his children and his instinct to protect them. When the day of the trial arrived, the whole town was in the courtroom. Scout, Jem, and Dill, with the help of Reverend Sykes, sat in the balcony reserved for blacks. Atticus did his best to prove Tom's innocence. He exposed inconsistencies in Mayella Ewell's testimony and showed that Tom's left arm was crippled, so he could not have hit her as Mayella claimed. Tom Robinson testified that Mayella actually tried to approach him, but was caught by her father, Bob Ewell. Bob was angry because he had seen his daughter with a black man and beat Mayella. Mayella, out of shame and fear, blamed Tom. Despite Atticus's strong defense and clear evidence of Tom's innocence, an all-white jury found Tom guilty. This verdict deeply affected Scout and Jem. They learned the painful lesson that justice is not always served. After the trial, Bob Ewell's threats increased. He wanted revenge on Atticus and everyone associated with him for the Tom Robinson case. One day he attacked Helen Robinson, Tom's widow. This further increased tensions in the town. Tom was sent to prison, and shortly afterward, he was shot dead while trying to escape. The news shocked Maycomb. Atticus had to break the news to Tom's family. The emotional strain of this task was not lost on his children. These events caused Scout and Jem to lose their childhood innocence. They now saw the world as a more complex and unjust place. But Atticus taught them not to lose hope. The change would take time, but would come sooner or later. In the process, the children developed a closer relationship with Mrs. Maudie Atkinson. Maudie offered them a different perspective. She was one of the few white adults who supported Atticus's struggle. She told the children that there was a slow change in the town, that people were thinking more. Jem was more affected by the events than Scout. His faith in the justice system was shaken, and this made him more withdrawn. Atticus explained to his son that justice is not always perfect, but it is important to keep fighting for it. By fall, life in Maycomb had returned to normal on the surface, but beneath the surface, deep wounds had opened in the consciences of the townspeople. Scout and Jem could feel the change in people's looks. Some were ashamed, others were still angry. One Halloween night, Scout starred in the school play. Her costume was shaped like a ham and restricted her movement. As she and Jem were walking home after the show, they realized that someone was following them in the dark. Suddenly, a man jumped on them. There was a struggle in the darkness. Scout couldn't see what was happening because of her costume. Jem's arm was broken in the struggle. Just then, an unexpected savior appeared. Boo Radley, this mysterious man, who had not left his house for years, saved the children from Bob Ewell. During the struggle, Bob Ewell died. When Sheriff Heck Tate arrived on the scene, he quickly assessed the situation. He decided to report Bob Ewell's death as an accident. He explained to Atticus that he made this decision to protect Boo. Atticus hesitated at first, but realized it was the right decision. Sometimes justice works beyond the law, Sheriff Tate said. Scout escorted Boo home. In that moment, he finally got to know the neighbor he had wondered about for years. He realized that Boo was just a lonely and timid person. Standing on the porch, he saw the neighborhood through Boo's eyes and understood how he had watched and protected them for years. Scout took Boo's hand and helped him into the house. This silent gesture washed away years of fear and curiosity in an instant. Back home, Scout found Dr. Reynolds tending to Jem's wound. Atticus looked tired, relieved to know his children were safe. Scout told her father what had happened and how Boo Radley had saved them. "Sometimes people surprise us, Scout," Atticus said with a deep sigh. "And sometimes those surprises make for the best moments of our lives." That night, before Scout went to sleep, Atticus read her a chapter from Brave New World. The words strangely resonated with Scout's own experiences. The complexity of humanity, the expectations of society, and the individual's struggle with them. Scout began to relate these ideas to his own experiences. The next morning, a new wave of rumors swept through the town. Bob Yule's death and Boo Radley's heroism were the talk of the town. But the official explanation was that Bob had fallen to his death from his own knife. Scout understood how adults sometimes lie to hide the truth, but she also knew that the lie was told to protect Boo. As the days passed, Scout and Jem began to process what had happened. Jem's arm was healing, and his mental wounds were slowly closing. One evening, Atticus had a serious talk with his children. He told them that justice doesn't always happen in courtrooms, that sometimes life provides its own justice. But that, Atticus said, doesn't mean we should stop doing what is right. This conversation changed the way Scout and Jem perceived the world. They now understood that not everything is black and white, that life is mostly shades of gray. This understanding made them more empathetic and understanding individuals. Boo Radley was never seen again. But for Scout and Jem, he was no longer someone to be feared, but a silent hero and protector. From time to time, they seemed to see a shadow in the window of the Radley house, and this reassured them. When November came, Tom Robinson's wife Helen and their children left town. They went away to make a new start. This was a turning point for Maycomb. People began to feel a kind of shame for what had happened. Slowly, a wind of change began to blow through the town. As winter approached, Scout got an assignment at school. His teacher asked the students to research their family's history. While doing this, Scout discovered the history of the Finch family. She learned that her ancestors had also fought for justice and equality. This knowledge gave her strength, and she realized that her father's struggle was a continuation of a tradition. As Christmas approached, the weather in Maycomb began to mellow. Not only the season was getting warmer, but people's hearts were getting warmer. Atticus gave his children a Christmas present, a watch for each of them. "Time is our most precious possession," Atticus said. "How we use it determines who we are." On New Year's Eve, the Finch family and close friends gathered together. Miss Maudie, Calpurnia, Miss Rachel, and Dill, who had come for the holidays again, all dined together. During the conversation, the events of the past year were recalled. Everyone agreed how the suffering had changed the community. As Scout listened to the adults at the table talk, she felt that she understood the world better now. That night, before going to bed, Scout looked out the window. She saw the dark silhouette of the Radley house, and for a moment she thought there was movement behind the curtain. He smiled. He knew now that the only thing to fear was the darkness in people's hearts. And the way to illuminate that darkness, as Atticus had taught him, was understanding and compassion. Years later, when an adult Scout reflected on these memories, he realized how that summer had changed him. He remembered the stories of Tom Robinson, Boo Radley, and many others. They were all victims of society's prejudices, but they were also proof of the goodness of humanity. Scout placed her father's teachings at the center of her life. Empathy, justice, and courage became her compass. She transcended the insularity of Maycomb and opened up to the wider world. But he never forgot his roots. Jem followed in his father's footsteps and became a lawyer. He worked to create change from within the justice system. In every case, he remembered Tom Robinson and treated every client with the same care. Dill never lost his imagination and adventurous spirit. He traveled the world, collected stories, and eventually became a writer. His first novel was about the Maycomb of his childhood. Despite his advanced age, Atticus Finch remained the conscience of Maycomb. He sat on the town council and continued to fight for equality. His efforts set an example for a new generation. Maycomb changed over time, but slowly. Racial discrimination did not disappear completely, but people began to question more, to think more. Tom Robinson's story remained a wound on the town's conscience. Over time, this wound led to healing and change. Boo Radley became part of the town folklore for his quiet heroism. People no longer referred to him as a terrible monster. but as a secret protector of the community. When Scout returned to Maycomb years later, he walked the streets of his childhood. Around every corner was a memory. As he passed the old Radley house, he realized that Boo had become a legendary figure. Sitting on the porch of the Finch house, Scout saw a vision of her father. Atticus was smiling at her, as if to say, "Good job, Scout." In that moment, Scout realized the meaning of everything she had been through. She had been at the center of events that had changed not only her life, but an entire community. And so, the story that began in the eyes of a little girl became a story of change, awakening, and hope that has lasted for generations. The childhood adventures of Scout, Jem, and Dill became part of the town's folklore. Tom Robinson's name was often invoked in struggles to reform the justice system. Atticus Finch's name remains a symbol of honesty and courage. Killing a nightingale was still considered a sin in Maycomb, but now people thought not only of the feathered birds but also of innocents like Tom Robinson and loners like Boo Radley. Scout's story was told for generations in Maycomb. The lessons of justice and compassion seen through the eyes of a little girl changed many hearts. Because Scout taught them, killing a nightingale was a sin, yes, but the real sin was to ignore the beauty of the world, to be indifferent to the suffering of others. And that lesson has continued to resonate in the conscience of Maycomb and indeed in the conscience of all America.